There was something different in the air that Tuesday afternoon. Tyler Brooks, host of the podcast Beyond the Game, noticed immediately when Draymond Green entered the studio. It wasn't the usual energy, that unshakable confidence that Draymond always carried. There was weight on his shoulders. There was something unspoken, hovering like dense fog. "Are you all right, brother?" Tyler asked, as they adjusted the microphones. Draymond took a deep breath, looked at the cameras still turned off, and said something that made Tyler pause. "Today is going to be different, Tyler. Today I'm going to tell something I've kept for years. Something that will change how people see Steph Curry. And maybe how they see all of us. You can perceive that when someone carries a secret for years, the weight becomes part of who they are. And when they finally reach the point of releasing it, something fundamental is about to change." The cameras turned on, the red light lit up, and the world was about to discover a truth that had been protected not out of shame, but out of love. "Welcome to Beyond the Game," Tyler began, his voice professional but curious. "Today we have Draymond Green, and something tells me this won't be a common conversation." Draymond smiled slightly, but it wasn't that confident smile of always. It was the smile of someone about to carry something heavy into the light. "It won't be, Tyler. Definitely won't be," he responded, adjusting himself in the chair. "Because today, with permission from my brother Steph Curry, I'm going to tell a story that changed everything for us. A story that the organization, that we as a team, that even the media, everyone protected for years." The studio fell silent. Tyler leaned forward, knowing he was about to witness something special. "You all think you know Steph Curry," Draymond continued, and there was an intensity in his voice that made each word carry weight. "You see the man smiling. You see the records. You see the humility. But there's something you don't see, not because he hides it, but because we decided to protect. How many times in life have you carried a secret not to protect yourself, but to protect someone you love?" 5 years ago, Draymond began, and his voice became softer, more personal. Steph went through the darkest moment of his life, a moment so deep that, honestly, we didn't know if he would survive. Not physically, mentally. Tyler was now completely still, the notepad, forgotten beside him. "And to understand this story," Draymond said, "you need to understand something about pain. Real pain. The kind of pain that doesn't appear in medical reports or headlines. The kind of pain that happens at 3 in the morning when you're alone and your body is screaming and your mind is telling you it's not worth it anymore. To understand how we got to this moment of revelation, we need to go back 5 years. We need to go back to a time that the public saw as just another season. But for those who were close, it was much more than that. It was a silent war, a battle that Steph Curry was fighting not on courts, but in the moments between them. 5 years ago, Steph's ankle injuries were already known publicly. The world knew that, knew about the procedures, the recoveries, the uncertainties. But what the world didn't know was the emotional cost, the psychological price of waking up every day in pain, of questioning whether your body would ever be reliable again, of hearing whispers that you are made of glass. It was a Tuesday in March, almost midnight. Draymond was at home, about to sleep, when his phone rang. The name on the screen, Steph. "Brother, can you come here?" The voice on the other side was almost unrecognizable, not because of the quality, but because of the raw pain in it. I need you." Draymond didn't ask what, didn't ask why. He simply got dressed and drove through the silent city of San Francisco to Steph's house. When he arrived, he found his friend sitting alone in the office, lights off except for the moon coming through the window. "I can't take it anymore," were the first words Steph said when Draymond entered. And then, for the first time in years, Draymond saw something he had never seen before. Steph Curry completely broken. It's impossible not to feel the weight when someone who has always been your rock admits they're falling apart. "The pain doesn't stop, Dre," Steph continued, his voice choked. "It doesn't matter what I do. Treatments, physical therapy, rest. Nothing works completely. And every morning I wake up and think, how much longer? How much longer until my body simply says, enough?" Draymond sat beside his friend, not saying anything yet. Just present. Because sometimes presence is all someone needs. "And the worst part," Steph continued, wiping his eyes, "the worst part is that I feel weak for feeling this. There are people with problems much worse than mine. There are people fighting much harder battles. And here I am, complaining about ankles." "No," Draymond said firmly. "Don't do that. Pain is pain. Your struggle is real, and you're not weak for admitting it." But Steph shook his head. "You don't understand. I'm thinking about stopping, Dre. I'm seriously considering just letting go of everything." The silence that followed that confession was profound, because it wasn't just about basketball. It was about identity. It was about a man questioning who he was, when the thing that defined him came with constant pain. That night, Draymond stayed. Didn't give easy answers. Didn't say, "You'll be fine," or "This will pass." Simply stayed. And when the sun rose the following morning, they were still there, two friends processing a difficult truth. Success comes with prices that nobody sees. "That night changed everything," Draymond said now on the podcast, his voice loaded with emotion. "Because I realized my brother was dying inside, and nobody knew. Nobody saw. Everyone saw the smile, the humility, the greatness, but nobody saw the pain." Tyler finally found his voice. "What did you do?" "We did what family does," Draymond responded. "We protected him, but not the way you think." And it was at this point that the story got deeper. Because what happened in the following days wasn't just about a team adjusting schedules or offering superficial support. It was about an entire organization, dozens of people, deciding there was something more important than headlines or public image. There was something more important than everything: protecting a human being who was in pain. "We called a meeting," Draymond explained. "Not official, not in the franchise offices, at one of our homes. And there were players, coaches, medical staff. And we made an agreement, a pact. What impresses most is when a group of people decides that loyalty matters more than exposure. We decided we were going to create a shield around Steph," Draymond continued. "Not to hide weakness, but to give him space to heal, mentally and physically, without pressure, without constant spotlights on every aspect of recovery." Tyler processed that. "But how? How did you keep this secret with all the media, all the attention?" Draymond smiled genuinely for the first time. "Because everyone who really mattered agreed there was something bigger at stake. And because when you truly love someone, you don't expose their vulnerability. You protect it." But what nobody knew yet, what Draymond was about to reveal, was how deep that protection went, and what it cost. Not in money, but in silent choices, in sacrifices that nobody claimed credit for, in moments of showing up when the entire world was looking the other way. In the next 3 years, Draymond said, his voice getting stronger now. We all did something. Something we never spoke about publicly. Something that will surprise you. The pause was deliberate, calculated, because Draymond knew what was coming next would change narratives. But before I tell you, he said, looking directly at the camera, I need you to understand one thing. Steph authorized this conversation. He wants this story to be told, not for attention, but because he believes that someone out there is going through the same thing. Someone is in silent pain, and he wants that person to know you are not alone. And in that moment, even before the complete revelation, something was already happening. Because the clip from that part of the podcast was being recorded, was being uploaded, and in less than an hour, it would be everywhere. Great things happen when nobody is watching. But sometimes, telling about these great things can inspire millions who are watching but feeling invisible. The episode was just beginning. But the internet was already on fire. The clip was only 1 minute and 40 seconds long. But it was enough to make the internet explode. Draymond reveals secret about Steph Curry. What the Warriors hid for years? Curry almost stopped. Shocking revelation. In 3 hours, the clip had 10 million views. In 6 hours, 25 million. And with each view came speculation. Theories, some close to the truth, others completely disconnected from reality. Naturally, this leads us to understand how we live in an era where fragments of truth spread faster than complete context. In Los Angeles, a sports analyst named Sarah Mitchell was in the ESPN studio preparing her live analysis. She had seen the clip, had processed the words, and unlike many colleagues who were already making dramatic speculations, Sarah decided to do something different. Look, she said live, I'm not going to speculate about what Draymond will reveal in the complete episode. But I can talk about something that all of us in sports media know, but rarely admit. Elite athletes face pains that the public never sees. Physical and mental. And maybe it's time we had this conversation for real. It was a rare voice of reason in an ocean of sensationalism. But it was just one voice, and the noise around was deafening. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Steph Curry was at home when his phone began exploding with notifications. He already knew this would happen, had authorized Draymond to tell the story. But being mentally prepared and experiencing reality were different things. Isha was beside him, hand intertwined in his. Are you okay? She asked softly. Honestly? Steph took a deep breath. I'm nervous, but also relieved. It's strange, carrying this for so long, and now it's coming out. And there's no turning back. There's no turning back, Isha agreed. But you're doing this for the right reason. You're doing it for all those who are suffering in silence. How is it possible that something that makes you vulnerable also sets you free? But not everyone saw it that way. On social media, the division was clear. Some defended, finally, someone being real about mental health. In sports. Others attacked, why create drama? Why not just play? And in the midst of all this chaos, there was one person watching everything with a mixture of guilt and determination. James Wilson, general manager of the Golden State Warriors. James was in his office, looking through the window at the bay, when his assistant entered. The media is calling non-stop. They want an official statement. I know, James responded without turning. And they'll get one. But not yet. First, I need to do something. What James needed to do was something he should have done 5 years ago. Publicly acknowledge his part in that story. Because the truth was that when Steph was at rock bottom, when that midnight call to Draymond happened, James was one of the first to know. And it was he who orchestrated much of what would follow. Flashback to 5 years ago, 2 days after that devastating night. James received a call from Draymond. "We have a situation, and I need you to trust me when I say, this is bigger than basketball." James didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" "I need you to give Steph space. Real, not fake. Genuine space to heal. And I need you to help keep the media focused on other things for a while." There was huge risk in that. Sports franchises live on transparency with fans, constant updates, access. But James made a decision that would change the course of everything. "Done," he said. "What Steph needs, Steph gets." And so began something remarkable. Not a conspiracy, but a coordination of care. The medical team adjusted protocols, coaches modified schedules, and the public relations team had honest conversations with key journalists about giving space. Have you ever wondered how many people need to be aligned to protect someone in pain without it seeming suspicious? But the greater sacrifice came from the players themselves. Draymond in particular. In those following 3 years, whenever Steph had a difficult day, and there were many, Draymond was there. Not just physically, but emotionally. He canceled personal commitments, refused interviews that he knew would ask invasive questions about Steph, redirected media attention to himself, often in controversial ways, to take the spotlight off his friend. "People think I'm controversial by nature," Draymond had said once privately to another teammate. "And maybe I am. But there are times when I choose to be loud, so that Steph can be quiet, so he can heal without everyone watching." It was silent, sacrifice, the kind of love that doesn't ask for recognition. But now, 5 years later, with the viral clip and the complete episode about to come out, all of this was about to come to light. And there was nervousness. Not because there was anything wrong with what they did, but because vulnerability on a public scale is terrifying. 3 hours after the clip went viral, the complete episode of the podcast went live. And what Draymond revealed in the following 30 minutes left millions in tears. "That night, Steph called me," Draymond recounted, his voice choked on the podcast. "He told me something I'll never forget. He said, 'Dre, I wake up every day in pain. Not just physical. It's the pain of disappointing people. The pain of feeling like my body betrayed me. The pain of not knowing if I'll be the same again.'" Tyler Brooks, the host, was visibly emotional. "And what did you say to him?" Tyler asked softly. "I told him the truth," Draymond responded. "I said he didn't have to be the same, that he just had to be real. That greatness isn't about being invincible. It's about continuing when you feel completely breakable. It's impossible not to feel when someone articulates truths that we all carry, but few verbalize. But here's what the world needs to know," Draymond continued, now looking directly at the camera. "Steph didn't just survive that moment. He chose to transform it, chose to let pain teach instead of destroy. And in the following years, he did something few people know." The pause was dramatic. He started showing up, quietly, for other players who were going through similar things, not just on our team, on other teams, young people entering the league with injuries, with doubts. And Steph became the guy they called at 3 in the morning, because he understood. This wasn't in the revelation plans. Not even Steph had shared this completely. But Draymond knew it needed to be said. He became a silent lifeline, Draymond said, tears now visible. "And the reason I'm telling this now, the reason he authorized this story, is because there are people out there, not just athletes, but anyone, who are in silent pain, who are questioning whether they can take one more day. And Steph wants those people to know he's been there, and yet he's here. The episode ended with Draymond saying something profound. "You know what I learned from all this? I learned that real strength isn't never breaking. It's breaking and letting people help. You put the pieces together, and then using those reassembled pieces to help others do the same." Within an hour after the complete episode, the narrative changed completely. The headlines were no longer about scandal or controversy. They were about humanity. Draymond Green reveals Curry's secret battle with chronic pain and mental health. Warriors created circle of protection for Curry in darkest moment. Curry became secret mentor for athletes in crisis, and beneath those headlines, in the comments, on social media, something extraordinary was happening. People were sharing their own stories, their own silent pains, their own invisible battles. A comment with 200,000 likes said, "I've had chronic pain for 8 years, never told anyone because I thought it was weakness. Today, hearing this, I called my best friend for the first time. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Draymond." Another. "I'm a high school athlete. I suffered a serious injury last year and thought about quitting. This story saved me." What impresses most is how one person choosing to be vulnerable can give permission for millions to do the same. But the story hadn't ended yet. Because while the world processed this revelation, Steph Curry was doing something nobody expected. He was preparing to speak. And what he would say would change not just the narrative of that week, but the conversation about athletes, mental health, and humanity in sports forever. Nobody expected Steph Curry to hold a press conference. The podcast episode had come out less than 24 hours ago. The internet was still processing, but there was the announcement: Steph Curry would make a public statement that afternoon. The conference hall in San Francisco was packed. Not just with sports journalists, but with health reporters, psychology, culture. Because this had transcended sports, had become a conversation about humanity. When Steph entered, there was something different about him. It wasn't the careful posture of someone in defense mode. It was the tranquility of someone who had decided to be completely transparent. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, and for a long moment just breathed. And then smiled. Not the public relations smile. The genuine smile of someone who was about to free himself from years of weight. "Good morning," he began, voice calm but firm. "Thank you for coming. I know you all have questions. But before any questions, I need to say some things." The room fell completely silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "Yesterday my brother Draymond told a story that I authorized him to tell," Steph said. "And since then, my phone hasn't stopped. Messages of support, messages from people sharing their own struggles, and many messages asking, why? Why hide? Why not ask for help publicly?" He paused, letting the question hover. "And I want to answer that with total honesty," he continued. "I didn't hide because I was ashamed. I hid because I was trying to survive. And sometimes, to survive, you need darkness. You need space away from spotlights to heal. How is it possible that privacy and vulnerability can coexist and both be necessary?" 5 years ago, I was at rock bottom," Steph continued, his voice getting more personal. "And it wasn't just about physical injuries. It was about identity. Who was I when my body didn't work the way I needed it to? Who was I when I woke up every day in pain? When I looked in the mirror and saw someone who felt they were disappointing everyone? Several journalists were now visibly emotional. I called Draymond that night because, honestly, I didn't know what to do. And you know what he did? He didn't try to fix anything. Didn't give me motivational phrases. He simply showed up, sat with me, was present. Steph looked at the camera, knowing Draymond was watching. And this man, in the next 3 years, became my rock. Not just him, but the entire organization. James Wilson, our GM, Sarah Mitchell, our public relations team, my teammates. Everyone decided there was something more important than headlines or public image. He took a deep breath, preparing for what came next. They decided to protect me. And not just protect me, but create space for me to heal, mentally and physically. And you know what that cost? The question was rhetorical, but Steph answered anyway. It cost time. It cost energy. It cost Draymond opportunities he sacrificed to be present. It cost the organization having to navigate media questions without being able to tell the whole truth. It cost all of us something precious. He paused, emotion clear in his voice. But you know what it didn't cost? Our integrity. Because it wasn't a lie. It was protection. And there's a difference. It's impossible not to feel the distinction between hiding with shame and protecting with love. And now, Steph said, his voice getting stronger, I want to tell you the rest of the story. The part that not even Draymond fully knows. The room collectively leaned forward. In those 3 years while I healed, while I learned to live with chronic pain, to manage it, to not let it define me, something happened. I started receiving calls and messages from other players. Some I knew. Many I had never met. He smiled slightly. Young athletes with injuries. Veterans dealing with the end of their careers. People in silent pain who had heard, I don't know how, that maybe I understood. And you know what I did? Have you ever wondered how transformed pain can become a healing tool for others? I answered every call, every single one, sometimes at 2 in the morning, sometimes during moments where I myself was struggling, because I remembered that night when I called Draymond, and I remembered what it meant to have someone simply be present. A journalist in the front discreetly wiped his eyes. And in the last 5 years, Steph continued, I became, I don't know what to call it, a kind of unofficial support line. For athletes, yes, but also for people outside the sport who were struggling. People with chronic pain. People questioning identity. People in the dark. He looked around the room, and I never told this, because it wasn't about credit. It was about being there, the same way Draymond was there for me. But then Steph said something that completely changed the narrative. And today, with all this attention, with all this conversation, I want to do something official. I want to announce something that has been in planning for months. He pulled out a paper, but then put it aside and decided to speak from the heart. I'm launching a foundation, he said, voice loaded with purpose. It's called Beyond the Pain. And it's not just about athletes. It's for anyone struggling with chronic pain, mental health, identity issues. It will provide resources, access to professionals. But mainly, it will provide connection. What impresses most is transforming the deepest wound into a source of healing for millions. Because what I learned, Steph continued, is that nobody should have to go through what I went through alone. And if my pain, my struggle, my story can make one person feel less isolated, then it was worth every second. And then something extraordinary happened. The side door of the conference room opened, and Draymond Green entered. It wasn't planned, wasn't in the scripts, but he was there. He walked to the stage, hugged Steph. And when they separated, Draymond took the microphone. "I wasn't going to speak," he said, voice hoarse. "But after hearing this, I need to say something." He looked at Steph. "You think it cost me something to be there for you? Brother, you gave me something. You gave me purpose, gave me the privilege of being part of your journey, of witnessing your strength. Not the strength of continuing to play, the strength of admitting when you were breaking, the strength of asking for help, the strength of transforming pain into purpose." Tears were running down Draymond's face now. "And you know what else? Every player, every staff member, everyone who was part of protecting you in those years, none of us regret it. Not for a second. Because this wasn't about basketball. It was about humanity. It was about remembering that before we're athletes, we're people. And people take care of each other." The entire room was now in tears. Experienced journalists, used to maintaining professional distance, were emotional. Because this was no longer a sports story. It was a story about what it means to be human. Sarah Mitchell, who was covering live, had to pause her transmission for a moment to recompose herself. When she returned, she simply said, "I've covered sports for 20 years, and never saw anything like this." And as Steph and Draymond remained on stage, embracing as cameras captured every moment, as the internet exploded with reactions, something fundamental was changing in the conversation about athletes and vulnerability. Because for the first time, millions of people were seeing that strength and vulnerability are not opposites. They are the same thing, and great things happen when nobody is watching. But sometimes, letting the world look at these great things can change the entire world. 3 months after the press conference, the video still had daily views in the millions. But the numbers were the least important. What mattered was what was happening in real people's lives. The Beyond the Pain Foundation received more than 50,000 messages in the first week. Not requests for money, but stories. People sharing their silent struggles. And with each story, the foundation team, led by Steph personally, responded. "We didn't want it to be just a foundation that sends resources and disappears," Steph explained in a follow-up interview. "We wanted to create community, real connection." And that was exactly what was happening. In Detroit, a college basketball player named Marcus, who had considered quitting the sport due to chronic knee injuries, received an unexpected call. It was Steph, personally. Not through an assistant, not a recorded message, a real 40-minute conversation about pain, identity, and continuing. "He didn't try to convince me to keep playing," Marcus told his family afterward, emotional. "He just listened and shared and made me feel I wasn't alone." This same scene repeated hundreds of times in the following months. Steph, Draymond, other players who had gone through similar struggles, all donated time, not for publicity, but because they understood. Naturally, this leads us to understand that real impact doesn't come from grand public gestures, but from countless private moments of genuine presence. But the impact went beyond athletes. Teachers began using the story in the classroom to talk about mental health. Companies implemented new support policies for employees with chronic pain. And perhaps most significantly, ordinary people began having conversations they previously avoided. I was in line at the supermarket, a woman recounted in a viral post, and I heard two men talking about Curry's interview. One of them admitted for the first time that he struggled with depression, and the other hugged him right there, in public, without shame. And I cried, because this is what real change looks like. 6 months after the revelation, the NBA announced an official partnership with Steph's foundation. Comprehensive Athlete Wellness Program, mental health resources, chronic pain management, and career transition support available to all players, active and retired. This should have happened decades ago, the league commissioner admitted at a press conference. But sometimes it takes someone with the courage to be vulnerable to change entire systems. And courage was spreading. Other elite athletes began sharing their own stories. Not to compete or call attention, but because Steph's vulnerability had created permission, had shown that strength and admitting struggle could coexist. An NFL player shared about paralyzing anxiety. A tennis player spoke about imposter syndrome. An Olympic swimmer revealed years of hidden chronic pain. And each story was received not with judgment, but with collective embrace. It's like a dam broke, Tyler Brooks observed in a special episode of his podcast 1 year later. Years of forced silence, of be strong, of get over it, all crumbling. And on the other side, real humanity. How is it possible that one person choosing truth can give permission for millions to do the same? But perhaps the most powerful moment came 18 months after the initial revelation. It was a Beyond the Pain Foundation event in San Francisco. 1,000 people present. Athletes, people with chronic pain, mental health professionals, families. And on stage, Steph and Draymond were together. Again, this time answering questions from the audience. A man about 50 years old raised his hand. He was called to the microphone. "My name is David," he said, voice shaking. "And 15 years ago, I suffered an accident that left me with chronic back pain. I lost my job. I lost my marriage. Almost lost my life because I thought there was no reason to continue." The room was in absolute silence. "But 1 year ago," David continued, tears flowing, "I saw that interview. I saw you admitting pain. I saw Draymond talking about being present, and for the first time in 15 years, I asked for help. I called my brother, who I hadn't spoken to in years, and today, he's here with me." A man beside David raised his hand. They were crying together. "So, I just wanted to say thank you," David concluded, "because you saved my life. Not by giving me money, not by curing me, but by showing me it was okay not to be okay." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Steph descended from the stage and hugged David and his brother. Not for cameras, although they were there, but because it was real. It was human. It was what the entire foundation represented. Later that night, after the event, Steph and Draymond were on the roof of the venue, looking at the illuminated city below. "Do you think it was worth it?" Steph asked. "The whole process? The pain, the struggle, all of it?" Draymond looked at his friend, smiled, and said something profound. "Brother, your pain saved lives, literally. So yes, it's worth it. It always was." They remained in comfortable silence for a moment. "You know what's crazy?" Steph said finally. 5 years ago, I was ready to give up, to let go of everything. And today I understand that that moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning. "Beginning of what?" Draymond asked. "Of understanding what really matters," Steph responded. "It's not about never falling. It's about what you do when you're on the ground? And who is willing to sit there with you until you're ready to get up? It's impossible not to feel that life's greatest lessons come from the darkest moments. 2 years after the initial revelation, Beyond the Pain had helped more than 100,000 people. But the numbers didn't tell the complete story. The real story was in the emails, in the letters, in the messages from people saying, "For the first time, I don't feel alone." And Steph? Steph continued answering calls, continued showing up, continued transforming his deepest wound into a source of healing for others. "You know what I learned?" he said in an interview on the Foundation's 2nd anniversary. "I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the rarest courage. And when you're brave enough to be vulnerable, you don't just heal yourself. You give permission for others to heal too." And Draymond, always beside him, always present, added, "And real family doesn't abandon you in difficult moments. They sit in the darkness with you until the light comes back. And then you carry that light together to help others find their way." What impresses most is that the greatest strength doesn't come from never breaking, but from breaking with witnesses willing to help you put yourself back together. 3 years after that podcast that changed everything, Steph and Draymond were back in Tyler Brooks's studio. Not for a new revelation, but for reflection. "If you could go back," Tyler asked, "go back to that night 8 years ago when you were at rock bottom, what would you say to yourself?" Steph thought for a long moment. "I would say, breathe. You are not alone. And this pain will become your purpose, will become the bridge between you and millions of people who need to know they are not alone." He paused, emotion clear in his voice. "And I would say, thank you for holding on tight, because on the other side of this darkness is light, not just for you, but for all those you will still touch." And there, in that studio, the story came full circle. From a broken man making a desperate midnight call, to a global movement about vulnerability, connection, and humanity. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how much you conquer. It matters who you are in the most difficult moments, and if you have someone willing to sit in the darkness with you until you're ready to find the light. Great things happen when nobody is watching, but sometimes the greatest thing you can do is let people see you in your most vulnerable moment, and trust that your vulnerability will give them permission to be vulnerable too. And in a world that constantly demands strength, admitting weakness is the most revolutionary act. It's the act that changes everything.